I'm a proud American that's been living in Sweden for just about 2 years now, paying very high taxes, but also enjoying the benefits of the Nordic welfare model.
And I'm a proud Swede that lived in the US for 2 years.
And in this video, you are going to get an unbiased view of Swedish socialism. We're going to present the facts about the two economies and let you decide what you think is the better system. Because no matter if you're the type of American that listens to NPR on the left or watches Fox News on the right, whenever Sweden is in the US media, there's generally some sort of agenda behind it.
There's a lot of interest about Sweden and its Scandinavian neighbors because they rank at the very top of almost every global index, including like quality of life index, prosperity index,
freedom of press index, life expectancy
democracy index,
ease of doing business index, global entrepreneurship index, least corrupt countries index, world happiness index,
work-life balance index,
human development index,
religious freedom index,
better life index, and so on. So it's no wonder that Sweden and its Nordic neighbors pop up a lot in the media during the American election cycle.
That when you look around the world, you see every other major country providing health care to all people as a right, except the United States. Those are some of the principles that I believe in, and I think we should look to countries like Denmark, like Sweden, and Norway, and learn from what they have accomplished for their working people.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country.
So what is Swedish socialism exactly?
What people are really referring to is social democracy, which is a political, social, and economic philosophy. Most of the major Western European countries have a social democracy to some extent. You have the Nordics, you have France,
Germany,
Italy,
Belgium.
And the Social Democrats here in Sweden has been a dominant party for 50 years.
And what social democracy advocates is egalitarianism. That is social, political, and economic justice. They basically want everyone to have the same opportunities and for there to be upward mobility in society. And what people actually fail to realize is that Sweden is a free market economy.
At one time, Sweden was more of what you imagine when you say a socialist country. In the 1970s, there were extremely high taxes. The government had a lot of monopolies. The labor unions had a big grip on politics. And because of that, growth stagnated.
It wasn't until the major economic reforms of the 90s, when taxes were lowered and industries were deregulated and privatized, that Sweden's economic growth rate surpassed that of other developed countries. But what didn't change in the 1990s were the welfare programs that Swedes had become accustomed to. Because once you get a taste of those things, it's almost impossible to take them away.
And we're talking about stuff like government-paid college, elderly care,
universal health care, child care, retirement pensions. Interestingly enough, many of these services are actually provided by private companies, yet subsidized by the government. For example, 50% of Swedish high schools are private. However, all students in Sweden receive vouchers from the government that funds their tuition. And what this actually does is fosters competition between schools and therefore elevates the level of education. I think what's really interesting about the US is that you have such a huge gap between the rich and the poor. And that gap is increasing year after year. You hear about the 1% of the US controlling nearly 40% of the country's wealth. And I remember when you were living in LA, you actually commented a few times like that you thought it was so strange how many old and sort of rundown, shitty cars there were everywhere.
Yeah, I was so surprised because you saw shitty cars everywhere. But then at the same time, you would also see like Bentleys and Lamborghinis and Ferraris, like really luxury cars driving around next to these really shitty cars that barely can drive.
Yeah, and so there's a huge juxtaposition between the poor and the rich there. And I think, like the cars are sort of a good proxy of measuring wealth inequality.
But here in Sweden, almost every single car is in good condition.
Yeah, I actually thought about that the other day when I was waiting for the bus. I've noticed that car after car after car was in great shape and was 5 years old or newer. And I thought back to that comment you made when we were in LA about just like the differences between the cars. And in the US, you have really poor rural and urban areas. So for example, you have the inner cities, you have the Rust Belt, you have Appalachia and other places that are declining economically.
And at the same time, you have really rich neighborhoods like the Hamptons,
Malibu,
or Palo Alto,
Jupiter, Florida, Greenwich,
Montecito,
Connecticut. Yeah. And you really just don't have that in Sweden. I mean, more or less, all the neighborhoods are the same. There are, of course, nicer neighborhoods and there are poor neighborhoods, but it's nothing like, the differences in the US. It's a lot more equal.
Yeah, so we have a saying in Sweden, or it's called Middelsvensson. It's kind of like the average Swede. And an average Swede, you would say it's like a mom and a dad, 2 kids. They have 2 cars. One of them will probably be a Volvo. They own a 3-bedroom house. And they go on 2 vacations per year. And
they live a really comfortable, nice lifestyle. Definitely the average Swedish lifestyle is more comfortable than the average American lifestyle.
Oh yeah, totally.
Before we go any further, if you're finding this video useful, please give us a thumbs up and please click the subscribe button. This goes a long way to support our channel so that we can make more videos. And if you're curious about our life in Sweden, you can follow us on Instagram. The links are in the description below. Sweden is perhaps the most equal country in the world in terms of income. Income equality is measured by the World Bank with something called the Gini coefficient. It's a number between 0 and 100. 0 theoretically means that everyone has the same income, and 100 would mean that one person gets all of the income. Countries with high levels of income inequality are like South Africa at 63%, Zambia at 57%, and Brazil at 54%. Sweden is on the opposite side of the spectrum and has an extremely low Gini coefficient of 28%. Only a handful of countries have lower than that. I think it's like Finland and Iceland.
I think.
Finland and Iceland. And for comparison, the US is at 41%. So Sweden has a very equal income equality.
The reason Sweden's Gini coefficient is so low is due to 2 things. Number 1 is the strong labor unions, and the second one is high marginal tax rates.
Although there are no minimum wage laws in Sweden, wages for even low-skilled jobs are higher than that in the US because of the power of the labor unions and the collective bargaining agreements they form with employers. Some might say that the labor unions actually have even too much power in Sweden. For example, most retail workers are paid double on Sundays. And so to counter the cost of this, most stores have either reduced hours on Sundays or they are closed altogether. So there are some negative things about the labor unions being that powerful. The other reason why Swedes have such similar incomes is due to taxes. And I think that this is the thing that scares Americans most when they hear the term socialism, is the high taxes. The top marginal tax rate in Sweden is the highest in the world at 57.2%. That's 20 percentage points higher than the US's top rate of 37%.
And in the US, you need to be making over $510,000 every year to be taxed at 37%, whereas in Sweden, you only have to make $82,000 per year to be taxed at 37%.
So yes, taxes certainly are higher in Sweden than they are in the US, but what do you get for paying those high taxes? As we mentioned before, these taxes fund the safety net, so unemployment, childcare, higher education, and elderly care. This means that the most productive people, though, are indirectly supporting the least productive people. And this is where the socialist aspect comes in.
So you might be thinking, with such high taxes, it must be impossible for Swedes to get rich.
And this is where a strange paradox comes in, actually. So we saw earlier that Sweden's income Gini coefficient is 28%, which means very equal incomes for everyone. However, Sweden's wealth Gini coefficient is 84%, which is the second highest of all developed nations. The USA is the first. This means that the wealth gap is actually quite high. And that doesn't seem to make sense, right? Because the income gap is so low. Usually countries that have high income inequality also have high wealth inequality. It makes sense, right? So the more money that people make, the more they save, the more they invest, and the more wealth they generate. And that typically is the case with countries like South Africa, Brazil, etc. But in Sweden, due to taxation, things are a little bit different here. Because although in Sweden the salaries are equal, there are a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners that make millions, if not billions of US dollars every year. In fact, Sweden has the second most billionaires per capita of any Western developed nation. Only Switzerland has more per capita. And yes, there are more billionaires per capita in Sweden than there are in the US. And these business owners are taking dividends from their companies, which is taxed at a flat capital gains rate of 30%. So it's not an income tax, it's a capital gains tax. And the US also has this capital gains tax. Short term, under 12 months, is 15%. Long term, over 12 months, is 30%. So basically the same as Sweden.
So you can get rich in Sweden. Sweden is actually one of the richest countries in the world, but only if you are generating your wealth through capital gains.
That is investing or owning a business. And Sweden has a lot of sole proprietors and entrepreneurs.
5% of Sweden's adults are involved in setting up new businesses, and almost 6% have invested in a business started by someone else. Sweden's corporate tax is 21%, which is the same as in the US.
Stockholm actually produces the second highest number of billion-dollar tech companies per capita in the world, second only to Silicon Valley. In Sweden overall, there are 20 startups per 1,000 employees, compared to just 5 in the US.
And I'm sure you've heard of a lot of Swedish companies, such as IKEA,
Spotify,
Husqvarna,
H&M,
SCT,
Ericsson, Skype, just to name a few. So how can there be so many startups in established billion-dollar companies in a country with such high tax rate? Simply because there is a lot more entrepreneurism. Let's say you're a typical employee in a salaried job working for a company in the USA, and you have an amazing business idea. What is going to stop you from pursuing that idea? The main reason, I know after talking with friends in the US, is the risk.
Yeah.
People just aren't willing to forego their benefits,
Losing their healthcare.
Their salary job. It's too risky to leave all of that to try to start your own business. Meaning those people that start businesses in the US generally come from stable social networks where people can support them. That is a generalization, of course. There are many rags to riches stories. But I mean, you think Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, they all came from very privileged backgrounds.
But the risk here in Sweden isn't as high just because of the social safety net that we've provided for everyone living here.
The benefits of the safety net are that more people are better educated, healthier, more secure, and upwardly mobile. You can take the risk of starting a company and still enjoy having healthcare, childcare, elderly care, and you can even live a somewhat comfortable life on unemployment. Not that you should. So those are facts about the American capitalist system
versus the Swedish socialism.
So now it's your turn to decide what system you think is better. You can leave your answer in the comments below. We read every single comment and we try to respond to every single question we get. And if it's not Sweden, if it's not USA, then it could be some other country, so you can comment that as well.
And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you liked the video, please give us a thumbs up.